Well, thanks for letting me have this opportunity to speak with you. Um, we were in Morgantown in 2013. We were hired by Main Street Morgantown to do a needs assessment, housing needs assessment of downtown Morgantown. We were back in 2014 to do a retail study for Main Street Morgantown, and then since then we've been into Morgantown 5 of the last 6 years for other uh, private sector work. So we've done a lot of work in Morgantown, and so it's a pleasure to be back and getting a chance to share with you folks what we found. Before I get started, real quick, I just want to thank Chris Fletcher. Chris spent a lot of time. He really did. He spent a lot of time working with our staff and kind of working through some of the stumbles we had in trying to get information and getting in contact with people and ultimately holding us accountable for some of the research that we did and what's ultimately in this report. And I do genuinely believe the report's better because of Chris's efforts. So I do want to personally thank him for what he did and just the amount of time he spent on this. All right, so we started this assignment, I believe, in roughly in January. We spent about 5 months of research. We collected just a ton of information on demographics, economic, and housing. We spent a lot of information or time on the housing piece, particularly getting information on your rental supply, your for sale housing stock as well. So I'll dive into some of that here today. We also covered what we call other housing factors. So that's crime, transportation, even WVU and its presence obviously in the area. We looked at blight, where I had a staff member driving up and down every single street within the city. So we got a lot of information that I'll share. Some of that I'm not going to cover again. Chris said that there's a lot in the report. So I'll just hit on those highlights that I think are most critical. But certainly if there's something that I don't cover and you feel like that it could have been a topic, you're certainly welcome to ask me. We got a lot of information from the folks in the community, including stakeholders through a survey that we did. We did a resident survey, so we got more than 1,000 residents to participate, which was really impressive. We did landlord interviews, which were incredibly insightful to us. So a lot of community input. So Bowen provided a lot of data and analysis, but again, the community was a great participant in helping us understand the housing market. And I think some of that stuff you're going to see here tonight is pretty insightful. The other thing that we did, and that's ultimately to kind of help you understand the depth of need, we did what we call a housing gap analysis, and we did that for rental and for sale housing. So I'll dive a little bit into that. And then we close out with just some of the housing priorities we believe are needed or that exist within Morgantown, and then recommend some outline of strategies for the city to consider. So the study was done on 2 geographical areas. One, and you'll hear me say this a few times, but just so everybody understands when they see graphs and other charts in the presentation, you're going to see references to PSA, that's primary study area. That's essentially Morgantown and the immediately surrounding areas that was provided to us by the city. So that's the primary study area. And then you'll see SSA, that's the secondary study area. That's basically the rest of the county. So you'll see comparisons of the two and how they interact with each other. So you'll see that repeatedly throughout this presentation. Okay, so again, we probably covered 20 different topics in terms of demographics. I'm only going to cover a few here with you. And really, probably the biggest things I thought were critical to the findings of the study. And you'll see in a lot of these graphs, again, the PSA, the dark blue, that's essentially the city of Morgantown, its surrounding area. The royal blue is SSA, the surrounding parts of the county. And then in this case, I did provide overall county and West Virginia numbers for, I think this is the only graph I do it in terms of households. So again, dark blue, every time you see that in these graphs, it's Morgantown essentially. And anything in that royal blue you're going to see in these charts, that's the rest of the county. So you've been growing. Yeah, you grew a lot in between 2000 and 2010. It slowed down a little bit over the last decade, but still had some positive growth, both in the city or in the PSA as well as the rest of the county. And then it's projected to continue to grow over the next 5 years, probably not at a fast pace. But one of the things to keep in mind, as you see those bars kind of getting smaller and smaller, that 20 to 25 is just a 5-year span. Those other comparisons are 10 years. So just keep in mind that you're not slowing down that much, but you are slowing down in terms of household growth. In any case, the entire county's outpaced, the growth has outpaced what has happened in West Virginia and what expected to happen statewide. Bottom graph, we had a summary of change in households, and that's projections from 2020 to 2025. And as you can see, all the blue, the dark blue is what basically the PSA or the Morgantown area is expected to grow. And these aren't really unusual in comparison to a lot of other communities we study. So it's those older millennials, that 35 to 44 age group. That's a big age group that's expected to grow within the Morgantown area. But look at the bottom part of that graph. It's the seniors, it's the baby boomers. It's no different than anywhere else in the country. And these matter, though. I mean, this isn't necessarily saying you've got a lot of seniors gravitating to the area. These are seniors that are aging in place, and that matters for housing. So they're there. Most of them are already there, but they're aging in place. As they age, their housing needs are going to change. Their preferences are going to change. Even their financial capacity to afford housing is going to change. And so that plays into the housing needs assessment. This is change in renter household incomes on the top. On the bottom is the owner households. Again, this is 2020 to 2025. And as you can see, the dark blue by those different income bands, you've got growth in most of the income bands over the next 5 years in terms of renters. But the greatest growth is going to be those that make over $60,000, and particularly those that make over $100,000 a year. For the renters are going to grow a lot. And so one, you're going to have a lot of growth among higher income renter households, and so you're going to need more higher end rental product. But even though you don't have a lot of growth on the low end, low income renter households, I can tell you more than half of your renters in the city or in PSA, which is basically Morgantown and that surrounding area, more than half of those make less than $30,000 a year. And you're going to see here in a few minutes when I get to the supply, well, that base isn't growing. It's a big part of your community, and those people can't find housing. And I'll show you that story here in a second. As for the owner households, most of that growth is not unusual that we see that in the higher income households, and that's both in the city and the rest of the county. But check out the rest of the county, the outlining areas outside of Morgantown, all the growth that's going to occur among those that make over $100,000 a year. That in itself is going to drive housing needs for the entire county, but it'll affect Morgantown. Overcrowded housing and cost burden housing. Overcrowded housing is generally those units that have more than one person per room. That's a HUD definition. Severe overcrowding is 1.5, over 1.5 persons per room. So you get a lot of overcrowded housing units in Morgantown, or at least in the Morgantown area, almost 700 of those units. Now, part of that likely is the student presence. With a lot of students probably crowding into units that they don't need to be into, or at least can't fit into reasonably well. But one of the things I will say, and I don't have it up here, and it's because the number was so low, and it's a credit to the city, is one of the things we look at is what we call substandard housing, which is, again, another definition of HUD. And those are units that lack complete indoor plumbing or complete kitchens. And believe it or not, even in the year 2020 in the United States, well, there's a decent amount of folks that do not have complete indoor plumbing or complete kitchens. And your number was so low, it might have been one of the lowest ones I've ever seen out of the 75 housing needs assessments I've done in the country. And that's a credit to the city. I mean, code enforcement and your ordinances, you're doing the right thing, because I think on the rental side, there was maybe 40 units that somehow were classified as being substandard. You don't have that in Morgantown. So that's a good thing. You still have overcrowded housing, and that's certainly an issue. The other one is cost burden housing. And cost burden, by definition, another HUD definition, those are households that pay 30% or more of their income towards housing. And then there's severe cost burden households, and those are that pay more than 50% of their income towards their housing cost. And so as you can see on the slide, cost burden households for the renters, you have 6,300 households, renter households paying a disproportionately high share of their income towards rent. And on the second set, you have 4,100 that are paying over 50% of their income towards housing. So just imagine that for a second. You're paying half your income towards your rent. That leaves you very little left for other essentials, let alone disposable income that could be helping your economy. So you got a lot of folks that are having affordability issue. And you'll see towards the end when I talk about some of the responses from the residents, they're basically reinforcing everything I'm showing you here. They're saying they're feeling it. They're going through this. I did that one. All right, rental housing survey data. So this is the multifamily housing supply. So these are all apartments that are not students. They're not student purpose. These are anything else that's not for the students. And we have multiple segments that we cut this up into. So you see market rate, which is any type of rental housing that doesn't have any kind of government restriction on it. Then you see tax credit that generally serves a household of four that makes up about $59,000 a year. And then you see government subsidized. That generally serves households. If it's a four-person household, they make about $37,000 a year. So different tiers of housing, we slice that up. These are where our staff has actually contacted apartment managers, asked them a ton of questions. I'm going to cover probably 2% of that information because it's incredible what we got and how useful it'll be to the development community who will also use this report. So a lot of good information in there for them. But what I flagged in here, and you see it in the red, was the 98.2% occupancy rate, so or 1.8% vacant. To give you perspective, a good market, healthy market, a balanced market that has some vacancies but not too many, you want to be about 94 or 96% occupied. So you can see your occupancy level in the PSA is incredibly high. It's telling you you don't have a lot of vacancies. And I didn't mark it in that first table, but check out the tax credit and government subsidized. Zero vacant out of probably close to 500 units in the city. None of them are vacant. I'm going to show you here in a second a wait list to get into one of these apartments. So if you're a low-income household, four-person household making less than $59,000, you are not going to find a multifamily apartment to rent in Morgantown. And then we did it also for the rest of the county. And even though that says 79.5% occupied, that is one project is driving that. It has 140 of the 145 vacant units. That's a project that just opened last year. So it's in its initial lease up. So if I took that out, the rest of the county's occupancy rate's around 99%. So take that one project out. You have nothing available to rent, virtually nothing to rent within the city, and you've got virtually nothing outside the rest of basically outside the county, outside Morgantown. So this is the wait list information. We broke it up by, again, the PSA versus the rest of the county. And MRR is market rate, GSS is government subsidized, tax is tax credit, TGS is tax credit government subsidized. I marked in red the percentages of projects that have wait lists. And if you see the subsidized stuff and the tax credit, they all have wait lists. And I even give you the average wait list, the range of wait lists. The point being, if you're trying to get into an affordable rental housing project in the multifamily apartment side, you got to get on a wait list. And then the bottom box where I just summarize housing choice vouchers, those are vouchers where the housing authority issues that you can take and go rent a unit if a property will accept that and help offset some of your rents. And that's, again, available to those that make 50% or less of area median income. So it's for the lowest income folks in the area. There's a 600 household wait list. So you're talking, it could, and I don't know factually the number, but I suspect that's a 1 to 2 year wait to get one of those vouchers. So you can't get a voucher for a while. You've got a long wait in all these apartments. So if you're a low income person trying to find a rental, you're really going to have a challenge. Morgantown or rest of the county, you got a problem. We then also cut up student apartments. So these are now purpose-built student apartment projects or projects that rent exclusively or almost exclusively to students where they do individual leases, per person leases, things like that. And you got a vacancy rate of 4.8%. That's starting to approach probably a stage of concern. This would have been surveyed, these properties would have been surveyed probably in February, March, maybe some in April, but February and March. So you might have some attrition by the second term or the spring term, but nonetheless, to have a vacancy rate around 5%, that would be approaching a cause of concern that may mean that the student housing apartment market, again, these are apartments, not the single family homes or anything like that. I'll talk about that in a second. But this is an area of concern, and you'll see in my recommendations later that this is probably a segment that's going to have to be monitored. We got this confirmed too, just talking to a lot of the managers. They had said they were starting to have some trouble filling their apartments with students. All right, so this is the non-conventional supply. So this is anything that's not an apartment, basically. So this is your single-family homes, your duplexes, a unit over a storefront, somebody renting a room, any of those kind of things. We broke it out by the non-student rentals versus the student rental product. And I think we had about 141 vacant. These are just vacant units, by the way. That's the only thing is we would find. Anything was advertised. And my staff's really good at trying to find products. So this is probably fairly exhaustive list of what was available in the spring for non-conventional rentals. So 141 of those would have been available to non-students, about 209 available to the students in the area. And so these are decent amount of vacancies, but one of the things I really wanted to highlight were the rental rates. And you'll see on there that I flagged in red that 1370 rent. That's for those 3-bedroom units, non-student rentals. There's 76 of those, so I picked that because that was the most common rental. So to give you perspective, at 1370, you got to have an income of about $55,000 to afford that. So again, most of your units are at 1370 or higher. You got 75% of your renters, based on their household incomes, they cannot afford that. So it starts to give you some sense of affordability again. As I said a moment ago, the renters or your residents in the community are saying housing isn't affordable. Well, there you go. Most of the non-conventional rental stuff isn't available. So backing up for a second, multifamily apartments, not many vacant, long wait list. You want to get a voucher to try to get into an affordable housing unit. You're on a wait list. Okay, well then I'm going to go rent at a non-conventional rental. Let me find a house, a duplex or something. Most people can't afford it. So you're starting to see a theme here in terms of your housing stock and how it matches up with the households in your market and their housing needs. So then the other thing that we covered was for sale housing. So this was from multiple listing service data. And what we collected was both historical sales, and I apologize, the asterisks are on there. That's from the study itself. But what they were representing was, or indicating is the sold product would have been anything sold from January of 2016 to January of 2020. So it gives some historical perspective. We wanted to evaluate that. And then we also then found out what's currently available. If I want to go buy a house, what can I get? And the only thing really to take away from this is what's in that royal blue box in terms of the availability or what we call vacancy rate there. Those 260 units that are available in Morgantown to buy represent about a 2.6% vacancy rate. The rest of the county is 1.9. To give you scale, what that means, a good, balanced, healthy market, you want to have about 2 to 3% vacant. So on the surface, it would appear that both the county, rest of the county, and then within Morgantown area itself, you got a good balance of vacant for sale housing in it. But let me show you here what is available. Well, first I'll show you what's been sold, then I'm going to show you what is available, and you've got a challenge ahead of you. This is just a quick summary of what's been sold since January of 2016. And half of your home sales within, again, the dark blue is the PSA, the Morgantown area. More than half of your homes that have been sold in that 4-year period were priced under $200,000. And check out in the royal blue, representing the rest of the county, most of the home sales have been over $300,000. Now, keep in mind, one of the things we look at, and I don't show it here in this presentation, we cut this data up so many different ways: price point, bedroom type, age of product. What we found was, yeah, you might be selling a lot of homes that are under 200,000, but these are much, much older homes. In many cases, maybe more than 50 years old homes. They're smaller homes, fewer bedrooms, fewer square footages, smaller square footages, and stuff like that. So there's a reason that these homes are priced lower than the rest of the county. All right, so this is probably one of the more interesting slides of this presentation, and there's a lot on here. This is available for sale housing. So it's anything that was currently was available back in the spring when we collected all this information. The top graph showing what's available by bedroom type, and most of your product within the city and rest of the county is 3 and 4 bedrooms. That's normal. Look at the price differences, though. I showed that's the average price what's in the PSA versus the rest of the county. If you want to buy something in the county, it's $25,000 more expensive than in the Morgantown area. But check out the 4 bedroom. So if you got a large family and you want to buy a home, the average price is $307,000 within Morgantown. Outside the city limits or outside that PSA that we defined, it's over $400,000. But maybe one of the most telling parts is that second graph, and that's where two things I'll show you. I circled on there the homes. This is available product. You have 76 homes in the city priced over $300,000. You got 128 of them in the rest of the county priced over $300,000. So that's probably an important thing because a lot of the new product that's getting built is this higher end stuff. But check out the lower end, anything under $200,000. Now those percentages I reference in red, those are all pertaining to just the Morgantown area, the PSA. But the homes that were available, priced under $200,000, that's 39.3% of your available stock. Look at how many people can afford that. 58% can afford that product. If I look at all households, if I just limit it to renters, think about renters that might ultimately want to become home buyers. That may be a goal of the city to get renters to become home buyers, get first-time home buyers, those kind of things. 75% of the people can afford 39% of the product. So you can start to see there's an imbalance. There's a lot of people out there that can afford certain price points. It's affordable product under $200,000. You don't have a lot of that inventory available. And then we just mapped everything out by price point. You'll see in the study, we through Chris's recommendation, we broke this out by these different price segments. So we have individual maps that show each one of these segments. They're probably a little bit more discernible than this. Residential blight, that was something we dedicated a lot of time. I mentioned we had staff driving up and down the streets. They spent days on this to build an inventory. And what they did was they identified what we would, again, these are just our estimates. It's a windshield survey. They're driving by. This has nothing to do with interiors and whether units are up to code or have serious interior deficiencies. This is just the exterior observation. And we classified them either as minor or major mitigation efforts. Minor being anything under $1,000 to estimated likely to be under $1,000 to fix the problem. Anything major over $1,000 in terms of repairs. And you can see you have a lot of stuff that's significantly blighted and has some significant problems. The only thing that I want to take away from this is we mapped them all out. We mapped them by major versus minor. And then I referenced in the study and I put it in this slide, street blocks that have a lot of the product or more of the concentration. On the most part, you got 4 or 5 houses. So it's not like an entire street block is dominated by this product, but you still have areas that have blight. And this could be used as a tool to kind of start helping to strategize, where do you want to make efforts to address blight. I spent a lot of time on this part. I won't dive into what went into this, but essentially we look at all the demographics, all the housing data, we match everything up along with all the projections, along with the vacancy information we collect. There's a ton of information we collect to get to this point where we try to quantify the needs by these different segments, rentals versus for sale. And the point of the numbers probably isn't your focus. Yes, some of these numbers are big. Over 1,000 units are needed that are priced under $550. And again, you're going to see in a minute what the residents say. This matches up really close to what the residents were saying is really needed. The thing to take away from this, whether it's 1,000 units, 900, or whatever the number is for any of these, because there's a lot of variables that affect ultimately where are you short, how many units can you really do. The point would be, we prioritize those and the kind of the color coding on the far right to say, where's your greatest need? And so if I'm advising a community, hey, where do I focus my attention? Don't so much focus on the number, focus on, in the end, where's the greatest need in terms of these priorities. And you can see where we've highlighted those, and it's really heavy on the rental side, particularly on the lower income piece. And you can see, I hope, if I've done my job right, you've seen a lot of the demographics and then a lot of the supply that's kind of driving this discussion and driving these numbers towards the affordable housing segment. With that said, the good news is there's also a need for this higher end product. So Morgantown also needs and should be supportive of trying to get higher end product in there to meet the anticipated needs of the community. Another thing I just wanted to show, I thought this was interesting. I don't think I put this in the executive summary, but I just thought this was kind of a critical piece that I don't know if folks are really aware. This is showing how many people commute into and out of, or stay in, I guess, Morgantown for work on a daily basis. You have 25,000 people commuting in daily. That's a lot of folks. I think 85, so it's 85% of the people that work in Morgantown don't live in Morgantown. That is, I think, hands down the biggest share I've ever seen. And that's an opportunity for Morgantown. You have a chance, and you're going to see, and it was really through Chris Fletcher's recommendation. I'm glad he made me do this. You're going to see there's people out there that don't live in Morgantown, but they want to be there. And I think there's an opportunity. So I'll show you that number in just a second. Another thing we had in here was development opportunities. I know you folks have a land bank where you have an inventory of structures and parcels that could be developed. But what we did, and it was through the city's help, but also our staff doing their research, we found a lot of properties and vacant buildings and parcels that could ultimately represent some development opportunities. So this is going to change monthly or yearly. So because people are going to buy buildings, put them on the market, demolish them, rehabilitate them, whatever. The point isn't what's on here or necessarily where they're located. The point is Morgantown has properties, whether the buildings or vacant parcels, that developers would gravitate to. So this could be one of those things that you market as you try to reach out to folks, investors or developers, to say, look, Morgantown's got opportunities. The study has shown that, and we got sites too. And there's a lot of communities that are built out and they just don't have the property to do anything. You folks do. One other thing I wanted to throw in here, because again, there was so much stuff we covered, but I thought this was a critical piece. That's opportunity zones. I got a lot of stuff on this page. The whole point is opportunity zones was passed by federal legislation in 2017. In 2018, each governor around the country designates areas that are opportunity zones. In Morgantown, you've got 3 census tracts that are opportunity zones. And then basically, opportunity zone gives incentives to investors to invest into certain areas, and they'll get tax breaks due to that. We provide in the report, obviously, a map like this, but we also provide web addresses of entities that are support the program and have investors lined up. And so a lot of communities will reach out to these entities and try to promote their opportunity zones to try to get investment into their community. So I threw this in the report because I thought this could be another opportunity to bring money into the city and try to get investment underway to address your housing. So the last few slides, basically community input. So we did stakeholder surveys. It was an online survey. We had 17 responses. I think we asked these folks maybe 15 or so questions. These are basically some of the highlights. What type of housing is needed? They mentioned housing choice vouchers. I talked about that. Special needs housing, so that could be the disabled, homeless, folks like that. Senior housing, family housing was what stakeholders believe. And you'll see some similarities between what the stakeholders are saying and what the residents said, and I'll show you that in a second. Affordability levels, stakeholders believe that housing, for sale housing under $100,000 was clearly a need, rentals under $500, but even the next pricing segments up of rentals and for sale were segments that folks thought were needed. By the way, you'll see these percentages on here, they add up to exceed 100%. That's because people can pick more than one thing. So we said, for example, what are the type of housing that's needed? They could pick multiple things. So in this case, we would get more than 100% answers. And the same thing will apply when you see the resident survey. Residents were allowed to provide more than just one answer, one suggestion. Construction type, renovation, rehabilitation of existing structures was dominated what the stakeholders thought really should be the focus, as opposed to just new construction. And then the removal of blight and then replacing that with new construction was a high answer. Housing assistance needed, home repair assistance, home buyer assistance, which you folks do both of those. And basically stakeholders are saying this is important to us as a community. Barriers to development, folks mentioned a lot of things, but the top 2 answers were availability of land. You're fairly built out in Morgantown, so I can see why that would be that answer. Cost of land, again, that's not uncommon in today's environment. And then we had open-ended answers where we asked folks, what do you think can be done? And they gave us really a litany of things but we put on here just the most common answers we were getting back. That's tax breaks or other incentives for builders to do workforce housing, infrastructure help from government, encourage redevelopment in blighted areas with incentives. Now, another thing we did, because of the presence of the university on and off-campus housing, and what that plays in terms of your housing market, we understood that we wanted to get input from property owners and landlords of smaller properties, and so we were able to interview quite extensively 6 different landlords and/or property owners that had a lot of off-campus student housing. We covered a lot of stuff. I just hit a couple highlights in this presentation. Why do they rent to students? Well, part of it's just because the properties they have are close to campus. It makes sense to rent to them. But another reason was the fact that students have access to student loans, and they felt that there was a greater security of getting a rent payment from students as opposed to opening it up to anybody else that's not a student. Some of the challenges they face: declining enrollment. WVU's enrollments declined, I think, 5, maybe 6 years in a row. They're feeling that in terms of occupancy. And as I mentioned earlier, you're starting to see a creeping up of your vacancy rate among the multifamily apartments. So clearly, declining enrollments have an impact on Morgantown, increasing competition and increasing costs both in maintenance and managing these properties. And when we asked folks for their suggestions, they got some great stuff in there, so I hope you do read the report. But they basically say, hold students accountable for these units, but also hold us landlords accountable for these units. And they didn't elaborate on this. I wish we would have got more information, but there was a few that mentioned, if you can help struggling landlords, particularly in this environment with declining enrollment, that could be important to them. And I think the last thing I've got before the recommendations is the resident surveys. Again, we had almost 1,100 people respond to this. We're really happy with the response and the efforts that the city made to get word out on this. But most of your people that responded were from the county, with about 2/3 of them actually living in Morgantown. More owners than renters responded to this. When we asked them, again, this is just highlights. We asked them a ton of questions, so some really rich information in the study. The satisfaction with your own housing, about over half were satisfied or very satisfied with their current housing situation. When we asked them what kind of housing challenges you're facing, there you go. You see cost burden. That was one of the things we statistically saw through the secondary data sources we provided. They're saying that too. They're having trouble affording what they live in. Substandard housing, so basically the quality of housing, over 20% responded to that as being a challenge. And then a lot of people, 14%, mentioned lack of down payment or deposit to get into a unit. State of the housing market. This is where we asked them, what do you think the market's doing? So not necessarily your housing, because we asked them about their own home. But now we're asking them, what do you think about the rest of the market? And 58% rated the Morgantown area's housing market as poor, with another 37 saying, well, it's fair with some issues. So you got a majority of folks saying you got some housing challenges in the community. When those people answered that, we asked them the question, okay, well, what's the problem? And you can see once again how the prices of rent, so affordability coming back as a big answer. Mismatch of jobs, or in this case, wages, matched up with housing costs. So you saw me earlier talking about the who can afford certain product and what's available to them. Well, there you go. The residents are reaffirming that basically. Neglected or blighted properties or neighborhoods was a big one. Do you think it's difficult to find housing? Majority said yes. Many more said somewhat. When we asked them, well, what is it that's difficult about finding housing? Affordability. Over 90% were mentioning that again. Quality of housing. Not as big as a response, but still a significant issue folks thought was a problem in the community. And then housing needed. Really, a lot of folks had a lot of different opinions. So family units were needed, housing for millennials, senior apartments, and even special needs was responded to by more than half of the people that answered that question. And then in terms of rental prices needed, kind of matches up with what the stakeholders were saying in terms of the rental product. It's the stuff under 500 ideally, but even the $500 to $1,000 rental rate was significantly commented on as a needed segment. And then for the for sale was under $100,000, followed closely by $100,000 to $200,000, with almost 2/3 of the people saying that's a segment that really needs to be addressed. Now this one, I'm going to give this a tip of hat to Chris Fletcher because he really pushed me hard to try to slice out our data and ask questions specifically to people that don't live in Morgantown. Would they come there? And so we did ask that question, and we got extracted those answers. Now, about 149 of those people responded specifically that don't live in Morgantown. Would you come here? And 63% said yes. You're talking almost 100. I think it was like 92 people said yes. We would come to Morgantown if the housing was available that met our needs, both affordability, location, and all those other things that they would be seeking. What they're looking for is move-in ready homes, and a majority of those mentioned ranch or single story, which isn't surprising with your big senior population. But check this out. If I was looking for like a really positive thing to pull out of this thing, and there's many good things that you folks have going on for you, check out the affordability. So the last bullet on there, folks that are interested in coming to Morgantown, what would you pay? What would you be willing to pay? Which I assume means what can you afford to pay? It's over $1,000 to $1,500. That's almost a third of your people that said that. And $751 to $1,000 is another quarter. So if I'm a developer that's looking at an opportunity to develop something in Morgantown, there's a chance. Clearly, there's a need for affordable. I showed you the wait list and lack of availability. But look at the numbers for people that don't even live there. If you had this higher priced product, again, that met all their kind of criteria, you have an opportunity to capture more people. And then if you throw in the fact, if you remember back on the demographics, where I had those projections of household growth, renter household growth in particular, of those higher income households, you're going to get the growth. The higher income households are coming. I'm saying you got a lot more people out there, I think, than people realize would get into Morgantown if you had the right housing for them. And then the last slide is just our recommendations and strategies, and a lot of these are fairly straightforward. But I think they need to be said, and that folks just understand to kind of take a logical and progressive approach to this. Set realistic and obtainable short-term and long-term goals. That could be how many units you think you want to encourage the development, and what kind of incentives or plans could you put into place. Anything you guys do, Morgantown's not in a vacuum. Clearly, you're affected by what happens outside the city limits. And so I think any efforts are made need to be kind of a concerted effort between the city and the rest of the county. One of the things I think is critical, you have a housing advisory commission. I did not study them specifically. I didn't look at their agenda. I didn't look at what they've done or what they have proposed to do. I can just tell you, housing is complicated. And there's a lot of things that need to get done, and you have to have some kind of leadership. Council can can vote ordinances, policies. You can do incentives and stuff like that, but you still need somebody that's watching this market. You need somebody that's doing the research in terms of strategies and networking, marketing, all of that kind of stuff. It should be done, and I think you've got an existing advisory commission that could possibly play that role. Now, I did put in the recommendations. Could you have a housing director? That could be somebody that's part-time. It could be somebody that's already on staff. The only thing I would caution you folks on, again, housing is complicated. You want an expert in there if you really want to go after some of your housing issues. And it does require time and resources. So again, whether it's a dedicated person or the housing commission or a combination, I would consider you look at that. Developing along your public transit corridors or your walkable areas, you've got a lot of those. You've got a good comprehensive public transit system. Looking at implementing or modifying some of your current policies. In the end, you need more housing. You need to encourage it. So think about those kind of things that might bring new housing, new investment into the community. You do have some programs already in terms of funding for addressing blight and renovating existing structures, first-time home buyer program. You have those things. Those are the things, again, stakeholders and residents thought were important. And clearly, I think those things should be, at a minimum, continue to be supported, if not trying to expand some of those efforts. You saw the numbers on the seniors, the high growth of seniors. You want to encourage senior residential development to address their changing needs, because a lot of those folks are not going to be able to physically maintain their homes or financially maintain them. they're too big for them. So you want to consider encouraging senior residential development. I mentioned the opportunity zones and the links that we provided in the study to try to encourage that and market that and do an outreach for that. Watching the market is certainly something important. I haven't been to your community in terms of a housing needs assessment in 5 or 6 years. That's probably as long as you want to go of trying to get somebody to assess your market. But there's probably things you could do on a short-term basis, maybe annually, that you're looking at your rental market and your for sale market. But I marked in here specifically, you've got a lot of moderate price product in your development pipeline. You've got a lot of units that are priced roughly between, I want to say 165 to like 224 or something like that. So you got a lot of that coming online. That stuff is needed. I would be watching that segment though, because it could become a challenge if too much of that stuff comes into the market at some point where it gets saturated. And then I mentioned to you folks the off-campus student housing market that appears to have is approaching a saturation mark, and I think that's something that absolutely has to get monitored. You guys have done a great job of the code enforcement and addressing some of the blight. Again, your statistics are some of the best numbers I've seen in a long time for a city of your size and age. And but that doesn't mean to take the foot off the gas pedal. Keep after that stuff. It's important. Marketing Morgantown to potential developers and investors. This study is armed with so much rich information that you could do some really cool things and really get the word out. And I'd be glad to help you. Put in contact with organizations and so forth to try to get word out on your city and the opportunities. And another thing to mention is the development partnerships that are out there, the public-private partnerships that we've seen that work. I can send you examples of those, of cities all across the country that have really embraced trying to figure out how the public and private sectors work together to solve some of their housing issues. And Morgantown's not alone. There's a lot of communities all over the country that are facing housing issues. And so some of them have done some really cool things that I think could be helpful. And then just the next step plans. I think it's, where we're at and where you folks want to start to talk about, okay, what do we want to do next? And that's all I got.
All right, thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Can folks hear me?
Hear you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bowen. I really appreciated the thoroughness of your report. Mr. Fletcher, thank you so much. I appreciate your input. It's nice to see that the report makes it clear that we're not crazy.